Hello, welcome back to the David Watson podcast. And today I spoke with Barbara and I learned a lot about a Mexican actress. Maybe you can learn something too. Hello, welcome to the David Watson podcast. Thank you very much for coming on. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you very much.
Something that immediately just caught my attention. You said you'd done a previous interview and had no trouble talking for 2 hours about the lady who I'm going to let you introduce. Where would you like to start with how this lady has captivated you so much that you can talk no trouble at all for 2 hours?
Well, I have to say this is probably one of the problems that professors have, because I've been a professor my entire life, and is that they start talking on a subject that they love and they just talk. So my problem is always to limit my comments. But I became really fascinated with Dolores del Rio as a kid, because I grew up in Los Angeles and I was fascinated with Mexican movies, and I used to go to them all the time. But by that time, she was no longer a big star. When I really became interested in Dolores del Rio was when I wrote my novel Frida, based on Frida Kahlo. Dolores del Rio, they called her Lola, and I'll call her Lola because it's a little bit easier. Lola and Frida were friends, and Lola had a kind of cameo role in the novel Frida. And I was very struck with Lola because she was such a different character from Frida. Frida was brazen. She liked to shock people. She liked to wear clothes that were unusual. She liked to use vulgar language. She liked to be the center of attention, she would do things like go to a dinner party in Los Angeles and on the way in say something really vulgar, like "go to hell" to the hostess, and then the hostess would say, she would be astounded, mortified. And Frida would say, "Oh, I thought that meant good morning in English." She would do that kind of thing just to shock. Lola was exactly the opposite. Lola was decorous. She was known for her elegance. She went to a French high school. She learned languages. She was cultivated. She was and she was beautiful in a way that Frida wasn't. And she was a fashion model. Once she became a movie star, she was in all the fashion magazines. But she was really known for her decorous behavior. And I thought that she made an interesting contrast. She also, in spite of that, she had her wild side. She had numerous affairs. She was married 3 times, had a wild affair with Orson Welles, and she had met with a lot of obstacles during her life, and she was very resilient. And I think that one of the things that really drew me to her, in addition to her contrast with Frida, was that she was so resilient. She at 16, she was married to Jaime del Rio. Her parents decided that he was a good catch, although he was quite a bit older than she was. She was 16. He was in his 30s. He was reputedly gay. But he was very wealthy. He was the heir to a large estate. And this was right after the Mexican Revolution. The Mexican Revolution was very left-leaning, and a lot of the families that had property lost it during the revolution. Lola's family was from a wealthy. Lola herself was from a wealthy background. Her father was a banker, but he had contacts in Texas, and he was very shrewd about hiding the family money, and so they didn't. They lost some property, but they didn't lose everything. They were able to relocate to Mexico City. Jaime's family managed to keep quite a bit of property, and Lola's parents thought that he was a really great catch. And so when he started showing interest in her, uh, they went for it. So they were married, they took this long honeymoon, they came back to Mexico, and then it became very obvious that Jaime was not a good property manager. He couldn't manage the estate. He imagined himself to be an artist. He wanted to go to Hollywood and be a screenwriter, and uh, he just money management was not his forte, and he lost a lot of money. In the meantime, Lola had a miscarriage, and the doctor told her she could never have a baby. Now, for a Mexican woman in the 1920s, of her social class or any social class, not to be able to be a mother was a terrible, terrible, terrible thing. I think for many women today, it's a terrible, terrible thing. But in that atmosphere, there weren't that many possibilities for women in that milieu. Um, and so I think another woman would have been totally devastated by, this news. But she picked herself up. She took up creative dancing. It was a time when Isadora Duncan was uh, popular, and she was spotted at a party where she was dancing by Edwin Carraway, who was a director, a Hollywood director, and he invited her and Jaime to go to Hollywood. Jaime was happy because he wanted to be a screenwriter. He thought that that would be a possibility for him. Uh, but Carraway had his eye on Lola. He really didn't give Jaime a chance to be successful as a screenwriter. He gave him jobs like filing scripts and things like that. But anyhow, Lola became successful right away. She was beautiful. She was exactly what Hollywood was looking for at that time. Most of the movie stars were blonde and blue-eyed, and that was the ideal. People like Gloria Swanson and Lillian Gish and Clara Bow. They were all, of course, movies were in black and white, but you still could see that that was the type. But just at that time, Rudolph Valentino had burst on the scene, and he was tremendously popular. He was the Latin lover, and everybody was in love with him. The women were all in love with him. The men started using pomade in their hair and parting it in the way that Valentino did. Everybody wanted to be Rudolph Valentino, and he was made tons of money for Paramount Pictures. And so all the other studios wanted their own Latin lovers. Um, Lola's cousin, Ramon Novarro, was in Hollywood at the time, and he became the next Latin lover, the next male Latin lover. Lola was perfect for the female Latin lover. They wanted a female Latin lover too. And so uh, she was an almost immediate success. Uh, after her first film, she became, as I said, a model for in all the fashion magazines. She was voted the most beautiful woman in the world by a so-called panel of experts, producers, directors, doctors, businessmen, all men. But not the most beautiful woman in Hollywood, the most beautiful woman in the world.
It's quite a claim.
Actually, I have a picture. Yeah, that is quite a claim. Here's a picture of her. So I don't know if you could see.
I can see that. Yeah, she's stunning. Yeah, she is
She is.
stunning.
Yeah, she is. She was a gorgeous, gorgeous woman. Um, and so there was a change in taste, and she became very very popular, but there were issues. And one of the issue, what language was not an issue. She spoke English with an accent. She had to learn English, and she took it very seriously. She worked very hard on learning English. But don't forget that movies were silent in
Yeah.
those days, so her accent didn't matter. But there were laws in every state of the United States against mixed marriage and depicting mixed couples and mixed marriage and mixed couples in romantic situations on screen. And so the question was what to do with Dolores del Rio because she was Mexican. Um, the laws were actually aimed at black and white marriages at first, and then what they called yellow and white marriages, that is Asian and whites, because there was a big fear that China was going to take over the world. I
Yeah.
mean, this is not new. This is yeah, but a book came out in the 1920s about how China was going to take over the world. Anyhow, there was this what they called the Big Yellow Scare, and so then the laws were enforced against the Chinese. Um, what the studios did was market her as a Spanish aristocrat. Being Spanish, she was therefore European, therefore
Yeah.
white. So that way she could play opposite Joel McCrea and other white men. Later, as as the century rolled on, and Roosevelt came into power, and he implemented the good neighbor policy. He wanted to have good relations with Latin America because as we approached the war years, he wanted to he wanted the Latin American countries to make, especially Mexico and Brazil, to make propaganda films for the Allies, and so he was. He was careful about our relations with Latin America, and so these laws against mixed marriage, they were kind of swept away, kind of swept by the side when it came to Latin women, and so Dolores del Rio had, as I said, she had an affair with Orson Welles. There were other movie stars like Lupe Vélez, who had a long-term affair with Gary Cooper. I mean, people got away with it, right?
It was a prominent part of the industry, wasn't it?
It was. Well, these people were products. Lola was a product. She had to be marketed. They couldn't take any chances. So, at least in the beginning, before she was super popular, they had to make sure that people understood that she was white. So they marketed her that way. She, as a Spanish aristocrat, she never denied that she was Mexican,
Yeah.
but she never denied that she was a Spanish aristocrat either. Anyhow, as we so this was all fine because the movies were all silent, but as we reach 1927, the talkies begin. So the first talkies made in 1927, and a lot of movie stars lose their they lose their appeal. They lose their positions. Excuse me. They lose their careers because their voices they don't gel with the image, or they don't have good voices, or even if they're native-born Americans and have no accent. Well, maybe the British think the Americans have a special accent, but anyhow, for our movie industry, they had no foreign accent, and but if they didn't have a good speaking voice or a voice that projected well, they lost. They were not popular with the audience. Lola, had no trouble making the transition because she always played foreigners.
Yeah.
She she played the American audiences weren't that sophisticated. They didn't differentiate between a Brazilian accent and a French accent and a Russian accent. So she played all those people. She played Charlene and Price Glory. She played a Brazilian in Flying Down to Rio. She played Russian. She played all kinds of foreigners, and she had an accent, but it didn't matter. It worked to her advantage. So she just kept. She was a person who just kept going. But then, as we reach the 30s, what happens is that the audience becomes very xenophobic because uh, we're approaching the war.
Yeah.
So the stories about the Nazism becomes a topic, Stalinism becomes a topic. Uh, and even though at first American audiences didn't know about the horrors of Stalinism and the famines and all, at first they didn't know about that. That wasn't in the papers at first. But eventually these stories began to leak in, and fear of communism uh, became tremendous. It was. I think today we look back and we say, "Oh, well, that was silly. It was an overreaction. They were afraid of this. They were afraid of that." But the fact was, if you were reading about the Nazis and you were reading about Stalin and people dying of starvation, I mean, 20 million people, uh, people were frightened, and so American audiences didn't want to see foreign actors on the screen.
Yeah.
Um, so Marlene Dietrich, for example, she went to work for the U.S., so she became an American citizen. Goebbels tried to get her to make propaganda films for the Nazis. She was very brave in that she defied the Nazis and became an American citizen and made entertained British and American troops through the USO. Um, there are many
Yeah.
examples of people who lost, who lost their careers, but so the same thing happened to Lola. She wasn't able to find good jobs, and she became very depressed. She was married at that point to Edwin Carraway. She didn't Cedric, excuse me, excuse me, Cedric Gibbons. Cedric Gibbons, who was a an art designer. He was very, very successful. He designed the Oscar. He won a bunch of Oscars. He introduced a new style of decoration, scene decoration into the set decoration into American theater. And so he was very successful, and she was not. She was at this point. Her career seemed to be fading, and so she divorced him. She became involved with even before she divorced him. She became involved with Orson Welles, but he was very demanding. He was a terrible person. He was a brilliant, brilliant director, but he was a brutal guy. Um, but she went back to Mexico. And when she went back to Mexico, she was happy for a number of reasons. First of all, she was able to act in Spanish. She had friends, Frida Kahlo. That was where Frida Kahlo became very important in her life because she put her in contact with important people in the movie industry, like Emilio Fernandez, who was a young director who was making a different kind of film.
Yeah.
So, and another thing that she didn't like about the American films were very trivial. The kind of thing that they were making in the 20s and early 30s here they were very silly films. Um, and that's understandable. People were going through the Depression,
Yeah.
and and then the war was coming, and people wanted to escape. They went to the movies to escape. But some of those movies they really are silly.
Yeah.
I have to admit
But
they're
they were
funny,
of their
but silly.
time, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. They were, but they were. I mean, they had their charm. Ginger Rogers, Fred Astaire,
Yeah.
yeah, it was. They were fun, but in other parts of the world, in Germany and in the Soviet Union and in Mexico, directors were looking to make more socially relevant movies. They were looking to make movies that addressed the social problems, like the position of women, like the social classes, like the abuse of Indians in Mexico, the marginalization of large segments of the population, poverty, alcoholism. These issues were basically overlooked in American films because I mean that's just not what they were about. But the Fernandez was very socially engaged. Uh, she had an affair with him. He was also a brutal man. The machismo and bullying that he displayed on set, according to all the reports that I've read, was just tremendous. But she made several movies with him because he really was a brilliant director. And his film Maria Candelaria won it was the first Latin American film to win what later became the Palme d'Or, the first prize in the Cannes Film Festival. So he won. Director Gabriel Figueroa, his cinematographer, won the award for that. Lola did not win for Best Actress, but the fact that she was in that film that won prizes in Cannes really put Mexican film on the map. It put her on the map. It really gave her all kinds of possibilities. So it was a wonderful time to be in Mexico. It's what we call the golden age of Mexican cinema. There were many wonderful directors and wonderful films being made during that period. But one thing that I would like to mention that is rarely mentioned about Dolores del Rio is that although she had no children, she loved children. And although she had everything that she needed, she was wealthy, she was beautiful. She eventually found the man of her dreams, Lou Riley, and was married. She never forgot others. She never forgot that there were people who were less fortunate than she. And when she was in Mexico, she became very aware of the fact that so many women who worked in the movie industry and in theater as cooks and janitors and seamstresses and in menial jobs had no place to leave their children.
Okay.
So when they most of these women came from the countryside. When they were in the country, when they were in rural areas, they had a support system, right? They had mothers, they had sisters, they had aunts, there was a network. But they went to the city to make more money. Often, if they had husbands, often the husbands would get involved in construction work or some kind of job that took them away during the day. There were no men around. Sometimes they weren't married, but they had children, and they had no place to leave the children. There existed at the time, and actually still exists, these centers called guarderías. Guardar in Spanish means to keep, and they were basically holding centers for children. There was maybe one adult who was not trained, had no special background in early childhood education or anything. Didn't just a person who was there with maybe 40, 50 kids, uh, and they were holding pens for children, and and from babyhood, from newborns practically to children who were 8 or 9 years old, who were then out on the street selling chewing gum and things to make money for the family. They weren't going to school, and Lola looked at this situation. She said, "This just can't be. You know, these children need to be educated. They need to have uh, they, they need to be looked after. They need to be cared for." And she became really involved. She read Maria Montessori, she read Jean Piaget, with Maria Felix, she put together enough money she started a collection, and they started the first daycare center, but was a real daycare center for children. And she said, "We're not going to call this a guarderia." She said, we don't guardar anybody here. We take care of children." And so she hired real teachers who had real backgrounds in early childhood education, and they nurtured these children and they taught them, and they had toys to play with that were educational toys. And she started one center and then another center, another, until there was a whole system of daycare centers in Mexico. I think that is a really remarkable thing for somebody like her to have done. She Everybody has forgotten about that, but I think that is really one of the things that made her very special.
Do you remember when she first came to your attention, where you were and what it was that attracted you to it?
Well, I think what really brought her to my attention was, as I said, when I wrote Frida. That's when, she kept popping up in all my research that I was doing about Frida. But she was always a marginal character because I was working with with different material, and I was researching Frida and Diego. Diego was very attracted to Dolores del Rio. He painted her picture, her portrait. It's a rather seductive painting. Um, um, but that's what I thought. This woman is um, she's different. She's different from Frida, and she's different from the other movie stars that I've read about. I grew up in Los Angeles. I was always
Yeah.
exposed to that culture, um, and uh, and for that reason, I had the book actually narrated. I had the story narrated by a fictional character, Mara, who is a better narrator, I think, than I would have been. I mean, narrating through her gave me a certain freedom that
Yeah.
I wouldn't have had otherwise. So when I first wrote this book, I wrote about 5 chapters, and it was reading too much like a biography. I'd done a lot of reading about Dolores del Rio. There are a lot of movie reviews, a lot of whatever was available. I read, but I just felt that I wasn't getting to her as a person. That I really needed somebody who knew her well, who spent a lot of time with her, who had lived close to her, but who wasn't in awe of her, to tell the story. And so I invented a fictional character. She's an entirely fictional character, Mara, who's Dolores de Rio's hairdresser. They're both from Durango. They meet again in Mexico City, where Mara is the daughter of, she's not the niece of a maid. And Dolores del Rio is staying at the house of Francisco Madero, who became the first president of Mexico. And he was her mother's cousin. And so so they're two different social classes, but of course they're two little girls, and they're together in a house, and there's no other little girls to play with, and they play with each other, and they become and they become friends, and then they both go through the revolution together, and one escapes to California, and then the other goes to California. Um, the advantage of having a character like that is, first of all, I think writing a novel about a real person is dangerous.
Yeah.
It's dangerous because you're putting yourself in the head of somebody else, and you can't really do that. You can't legitimately do that. And I didn't feel comfortable playing God with Dolores del Rio. So Mara, she observes Lola. She talks about her. She says, Lola did this, Lola did that. Sometimes she says, and this is what she meant when she said, but then I'm not sure that that's what she meant. She'll remember, but then she's not quite sure that she remembers correctly. So it introduces an element of subjectivity
Yeah.
into the book that I thought was necessary, because I didn't want to put myself in the position of either being the psychiatrist of Lola or some supreme deity that knew what was going through her head. So I have a character who thinks she knows, but then she's not sure that she knows, and then she comments on it, and she's also not in awe of her. So the movie industry, for people who've grown up around it, is movie stars are, they're glamorous, but they're actually not that interesting.
Yeah.
In that, well, I mean,
No, but
they can be very, very talented. But I
think,
mean, it's a profession like any other, and so they do. They go to parties, and they're in. They make movies, and they learn scripts, and but somebody like Lola, actually, these people are sheltered from a lot of the things that are happening in the world. Somebody like Lola, who is not married a lot of the time, has no children, is extremely wealthy, and is most of the time very much in demand. A woman like that does not suffer from, say, the depression. So so during the course of the novel, of course, the depression happens, but Mara is the person who lives in the real world like you and I do, or at least the way I do. When there's an economic downturn, she feels it. Her husband, she's married. She has 4 children. She loses her husband loses her job. She has to go back to work at the beauty shop. At the beauty shop, she meets a lot of women who have lots of problems. So this, everything that's happening in the world at that time, all that comes out in the novel. And for example, the polio epidemic, that's something that wouldn't affect Lola, but it affects Mara, but she has 4 little girls.
Yeah.
And she and her husband Gabe are, they're terrified. Think of how frightened we were during COVID. This was much worse. I mean, these kids were in iron lungs. A lot of them died. And so they were afraid to let their kids to go out, and they were afraid to let them go to the pool. They didn't want them to go to the park. They didn't want them to go outside because polio was a real threat. And that's something that Mara and her husband Gabriel face, but Lola doesn't, although she becomes involved simply because she's Mara's friend, and at some point Mara needs money for medicine, and Lola comes through. And then the war starts. Lola has an out. She goes back to Mexico. Mara's husband goes into the army. that doesn't turn out well. It ends that story, that part of the story ends tragically, and so we go through the whole thing of what people went through. She was a single woman trying to raise 4 children on a very meager widow's pension, and her salary from the beauty shop. How did she survive? So this is, and she's always in contact with Lola. So they're always back and forth, and Lola tries to help her, and she tries to help Lola. They are friends, and that's another theme that's very important in the book, which is the friendship between women, sisterhood, the way women help each other. But I think without Mara, I couldn't have brought all of that together, all that context together in the book. So she's an important character.
When did you start writing?
Oh, well, I actually started writing when I was in high school. I won the high school journalism prize, and then I went to UCLA, and I worked on the Daily Bruin, and my first job was writing textbooks. I wrote the ALM series, which is a language program, mm-hmm. and I wrote the Spanish series with a co-author, Guillermo Segreda, who's passed away. But I wrote the short stories at the end of the the chapters.
What were you writing in high school then? What were you writing about that when you were prize?
Oh golly! So I was writing newspaper articles, and I will still say that the most important lessons I ever learned about writing, I learned in Mr. Adelson's journalism class when I was, 15. And the prize was to write publicity blurbs for the movie Gone with the Wind, which had just come out. And so I had to go and interview people and run around Los Angeles, which was not making my mother happy. But anyhow, yeah. So I've been at it a long time.
So when you were younger, what films did you like watching then?
What films?
Yeah, what were you watching?
My very favorite film was Donde Estás Corazón with Lola Beltran. It's a totally silly, romantic film full of Mexican folk music. And Lola Beltran has a beautiful, beautiful voice. And at the end, the lovers are separated. Well, they're separated on Earth by death, but at the end, in the last scene, is that they're in heaven and among the clouds, they're dancing and they come together. And that was, so yes, I have always loved that film. But then later in college, so I was a French major in college, but then I got my PhD in Spanish and taught Spanish theater, and so a lot of the Spanish poetry. So I do 16th and 17th century. That's my field, and so a lot of the Spanish poetry and a lot of the Spanish plays are like that.
Yeah.
The lover. There's the lovers come together at the end after death.
Okay, so that's a nice bit of romance in the sense that we will because normally it's till death do us part.
Yeah, well, this is kind of a poetic justice, but in Catholic countries, there's death is not the end. So
that's it. Yeah, no, that's correct.
And we're talking about the 16th century, so we're very much in Catholic Spain at that point.
So how did that person end up writing the books that you've written? What's in the middle? Where did you?
Okay, well, so I've been a scholar my whole life. I taught at Georgetown University for decades. I was a full professor, won teaching prizes and all that kind of thing. Um, I one of the most well, I'll just say this as an aside. One of the most interesting things I did at Georgetown, I taught the 16th and 17th century for decades, and I taught everything that I wanted. It was a wonderful, wonderful career. I taught Calderon, I taught Lope de Vega, I taught Cervantes, Don Quixote, all of those things. But my son was a Marine, and he was in Iraq. And when he came back, I really felt I really felt so grateful. I felt that I needed to give back. And I kind of looked around for a way to do that. And I looked to see what was going on campus, what they were doing for veterans who were coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And the answer was nothing. And so I got involved with veterans. I became the first faculty advisor of the Student Veterans Association. We lobbied to get a veterans center, to get a there was no veteran coordinator or director or anything at that point. And so working for the veterans became very, very important, a very important part of what I did at Georgetown. I One of the things I did was organize a symposium on women in war. And from that, a book came called, it's a collection called Collateral Damage, Women Write About War. And so there are selections from women, from China, France, Iraq, Latin America, the United States, and about their experiences in war. And some of them are essays, there's poetry, there's a play. But for women, war is always the same. It's always loss. It's always loss of fear, and it's never mentioned when they talk about war. They talk about casualties and collateral damage being people who die accidentally during battles, but the women who have nervous breakdowns, so the women who lose all their property, or the women who lose their children, or the women who die of grief, that's not mentioned. So that's why I put this book together. Another book that I wrote is called Imagining Iraq, and one of the things that many mothers have told me, and that many soldiers have told me, is they don't talk about their experience. Soldiers don't talk about their experiences, and they especially don't talk to their mothers about their experiences. And my son never talked to me about his experiences in Iraq. But as faculty advisor to the veterans, sometimes they would come into my office and just plop down and talk. And they would talk. And they would talk for hours. And if I had something else to do, I just wouldn't do it. I would sit there and listen because I wanted to hear them. And so I took a lot of these stories, and I didn't tell them exactly the way they were told to me. I embellished them. I made them into fiction. I fictionalized them. But I put together a book of short stories called Imagining Iraq. And it's the narrator is a mother who is not in Iraq, who was hearing stories about Iraq, but who was spending all of her time imagining Iraq. And that's that is autobiographical. So war, as a number of critics have pointed out, is important in all of my books, and I think it's because I'm somewhat obsessed with having gone through having a child in a war zone, and not sleeping for 5 years. That's something that I know a lot of women and men have been through.
It is. It's something that's rarely ever seen in war films. Everything is about, like, as you mentioned, casualties, and most wars are predominantly men on the front line, especially historically. And every war film that
Right.
was done about that, it's always just the heroics of somebody that died or the tragedy of somebody that died. But that somebody was someone's son, possibly their husband, and possibly someone's father, someone's brother, someone's uncle. Always. And the carnage is at home.
Yes.
And all of those people, all they've ever done is just wait. And it's just a waiting game of what news am I going to receive and when am I going to receive it.
I have in my book, I have collateral damage. There's a woman from Rwanda who lost 35 members of her family
Wow.
in the wars there. I mean, what people went through, what women went through, uh, men too, but men took a more active role. It was the women who and there are women soldiers, and there have always been certain women who have fought in wars, but for the most part, the women have not been the active members. They have been, the ones who stay at home and wait and worry and lose,
Yeah.
and so yeah. So I don't know. This was kind of a catharsis,
No, but
one of these books that I had to do.
it's difficult. Where can people find you?
Where can they find me? Okay, I have a website, www.barbaramuhika, one word, .com. My books are on Amazon. Miss Del Rio is on Amazon. Here is Miss Del Rio. And I have a number of other novels. I mentioned Frida. I have one called Sister Teresa, based on the life of Teresa Favela. It's not a religious book. Don't be put off by that if you think it's a book on theology. It's not. It's a book about a really feisty woman who takes on the authorities and wins. And one called I Am Venus. It's about the painter Velázquez, the Spanish painter Velázquez, but the center of the book is really Venus, his model, who she narrates the story, and she is very insightful. I've done a lot of work, a lot of research, a lot of teaching on women and women's the situation of women in early modern Spain, and so I was able to bring a lot of that into the novel. That's the fun part about writing novels.
It is. And just lastly, my random question. Imagine you have a time machine. The time machine is a car. What car would be your time machine? Where would you go? And what would be playing on the radio?
Oh, wow. That's not a good question for me because I'm not a car person. I don't like.
What would you like instead of a car?
Were,
What would you like instead of a car?
I would like a chauffeur.
so we'll have a chauffeur-driven car. That's perfect.
I hate traffic. I hate, and the people in Florida drive like maniacs. They drive so fast. It's just, I don't, yeah.
So a chauffeur-driven car, where would you go?
Yes. Where would I go? There are places that I've really always wanted to go, and I've always wanted to go to India. I've always wanted to go to Istanbul.
Okay.
Those places are exotic, and I dreamed of going to Iraq. I really thought that the war would be over, peace would come, and they would build tourist hotels, and people like me could go and visit. And of course, what happened. Without getting into politics too much,
that hasn't
happened yet. No, that hasn't happened yet.
What would be playing on the radio?
Well, probably an audiobook.
That's all right.
There are lots of I love Isaacson's biographies. I just finished his biography of Einstein, and I won't pretend that I understood
Yeah.
most of the science, but really the story of how Einstein approached problems, how he used intuition, and uh, how he had an idea first, and then he went about the proof.
Yeah.
He very, very intuitive, and one would not think so. I mean, at least I would not think so. I didn't think that, but I learned a great deal from this book, and I also read his book on Leonardo, which I found fascinating. So yeah, maybe I would listen to one of his books. Those two books I read, but if I were in the car for a long time, I might want to listen to one.
Barbara, that's perfect. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Take care. And that was Barbara. Please do check out the website. It'll be in the description. Have a look at her books. And it's always interesting for me when I speak to people and I start learning the history of other cultures, because it's difficult not to. But if you are from a particular area, a particular place, it's actually, well, it's impossible to understand the history of TV, radio, their own shows and their own literature, because you're not exposed to it. So it's always interesting to learn of these people. So yeah, check out our website, have a look. And as always, thank you very much for the support. Wherever you're from, whatever you believe, please do take care and be blessed. Thank you.